Good day, guys. Today we are going to talk about documents, diving deep into documents. We all get into this business and we want to get into some larger losses or even smaller losses, and depends on your definition of large. Uh, you have to determine that for you and your size of your company. Some people consider large losses to be a lot less money than other people do, and it just depends on the size of your business and the size of your company. But we get into this business originally because we're good restorers or want to be good restorers and want to learn all we can and get into that. But to make money in this business, which is what everyone's ultimate goal has to be able to survive and stay in business, you got to get paid. And the only way to get paid when you're in the business of restoration work that involves an insurance company is to do the documentation that they want you to do. And they don't mind paying for the documentation, but they do want the documentation done before they will reimburse their client. We, over the years, as restorers, have taken the task of doing their paperwork for them in order for them to give us money or give the client money to give to us to get that done. So, by proxy, we have dove really deep into that pond and now we have to swim in it. So, we want to talk today about the types of documentation and as equally important, why you do that documentation, and some about how you can do it as we go through here. So, there's tons of programs out there. You can see on the screen here all the different things. There's tons and tons and tons of document management programs, document software. There's job docs. There's all kind of different programs you can choose. You have to find one that's right for your company that you like. There are none that I'm aware of that's perfect for everybody. There's always a little twist or something that you need to have custom done, and something that you do a little differently. So it's good if you can have a program you can customize a little bit. But if not, you'll just have to retrain yourself to work within the parameters of the program that you choose to use. Lots of document management software out there that'd be glad to take your money. Why do we need it? As I said a little bit ago, we need it in order to give to our client so our client can get paid. So you can do 10 jobs exactly the same and do the documentation exactly the same, and 10 different adjusters or consultants will want it done 20 different ways. So there's no quote unquote right way for you to do it. What I suggest is have a good checklist, know your documentation, and do your documentation your way, not necessarily their way. Why take the time to utilize manpower to document? It's because if your customer's filing this with an insurance claim, the insurance is going to want that documentation before they write a check. So that's why you take the time to do it. Do you charge for doing that? Absolutely, you charge for doing that. We don't do anything in this industry for free, and neither should we. I mean, if the insurance adjuster wants drawing logs and a sketch and a drawing of the house and all that kind of stuff, and he don't want to pay you to do it, well, that's good. He can go out there and do it himself, and he can go out there every day and take drawing documents if he wants to. But if you're going to do it, you need to get paid for doing it. Whether you're using the documentation program called Xactimate, or if you're using time and material, or if you're just simply using a spreadsheet that you've made up that works good for you. But that's why we have to take the time and the manpower to do the documentation. As far as when it comes to getting paid, it is the most important thing that you can do in order to get payment done to get your payment done in a timely manner. You're providing official information or evidence that serves as a record to the insurance company, and to be able to provide them a complete record, you have to complete the relevant documentation. The key word there being relevant. What is relevant? What is relevant to one company may not be relevant to another company. So you have to figure out the way you're doing it and do it that way. You've got photographs, text messages, contracts, all kind of documentation, labor logs, equipment logs, you name it, verifications of different things that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. But lots of ways to do documentation. If you don't take anything out of today's program, is make you a list, figure out what all you're going to use in your documentation, maybe look at some of your past jobs and what adjusters or consultants have asked for and require, and make sure you get everything on that list. Once you do that, is you go by that list and you do it your way. If you do 300 jobs a year, residential, commercial, don't matter, but if you do 300 jobs a year, you cannot do the documentation and the paperwork 300 different ways and expect you and your staff to do it correctly. Because if they're changing every time the phone rings, you'll never get it right. You have to do it the same way every time, and then they need to take your documentation, and hopefully you'll have everything in it they need. But if you need to supplement it with an extra piece, then you may or may not add that to your list later. But I wouldn't toss back and forth between plans because this one wants you to use this software program, and to be on our system, you got to use this program. If you don't use that program, we won't use you. Well, they didn't use you anyway, unless you're on program work. Program work will tell you what kind of documentation to use if you choose to do program work. And then you go by the program work if you sign up for the program. If you go play a ball game, you got to go by the rules of the ball game, and that's sort of what you're doing when you sign into program work. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'll let you make that decision for your company, but I'm saying if you're doing program work, each program that you get involved with will have a different set of documentation and a different set of steps that you need to go to be able to submit that and get your money on it. With your job requirements through the IICRC's S500, I think all of you probably are familiar with the IICRC. The S500 is a water damage standard on there, and the most widely recognized body in the country, if not the world, for putting out recommendations for doing a water damage job or how to perform a water damage job. They have several categories in there. Some of them tell you must do something, it's required, or it's recommended, or you should do something. Different words they use that have definitions in their glossary for what you should do on that. But when you're going, if your contract says you're going to drive by the standards of the S500, then you need to know the S500. And you need to know it better than your adjuster does. And that's not hard to do. Most of these adjusters will go through 3, 4, 5 days of training. They're thrown out to be an adjuster, and then they just go by hard knocks and training seminars and emails and things that they get along the way. And their goal is to do one thing. Everyone tell you their goal is to close the file, but they're not going to close that file if they can't save some money. So they're looking to save that money on a very small job, maybe not. If you've got your documentation down perfect, maybe not. And we're talking about the majority of, we're not talking about everyone. You'll have some adjusters out there that just are intent on getting the proper documentation, putting the file and writing a check and closing it. But those are fewer then the other side of the coin is just look back through your files and pick each job apart. What did the adjuster want? What did the consultant want? And write all that down, and then make your list of what you're going to provide them. And you'll find out that list is ever changing. Sometimes they may want moisture meters, moisture mapping, and use color code, green, yellow, red, greens within the parameters of the dry standard. Yellow's elevated but not terrible, and red's off the chart. Use that for years and years and years. But some of your adjusters say, no, I want the actual number. I want to see if it went from 30% down to 22% over the next day, or if it went back up, or which way it goes. Well, that's more time consuming to do the numbers if you do several numbers in a room. Some will want one moisture point per wall. Some wants a moisture point every 10 feet. You cannot read these guys' minds, and they're always armchair quarterbacking because they're never there in the beginning, almost never there. So, again, figure out your way of doing it, which way you're going to do it, and stick by it. A lot of restorers now are using the E3 program. It's another documentation program that you can use that has a lot of the documentation in it, and when you learn it, it does a pretty good job documenting everything from the amount of equipment you're using to how you're doing it to when it should be dry. And it's an interesting program. It's another tool in the toolbox. Again, figure out what's best for your company and do that. The benefits of getting accurate documentation is reduces your liability. You come back in a few months or years later and somebody says, well, I got mold in my house. My wife's been sick for 18 months now since we had this water damage. Then you need to be able to properly document that we dried the house properly. There was no mold detected when we were there. Had no reason to be detected. And just to be able to document that for your liability purposes. Another liability that a lot of restorers don't see coming. You go in and you have a toilet overflow from the bowl, and you call it a Category 3 water damage. And so you tear out the flooring, you tear out the carpet, you tear out the sheetrock 2 feet up the wall, you tear out the vanity, and all this tear out stuff. The adjuster comes in 3 weeks after the job's complete and says, you shouldn't have tore any of that out. It's Category 2. Well, no, it's Category 3. It came from the toilet bowl. Well, show me pictures of feces and toilet paper and stuff like that you took off the site to document that it's Category 3. Or was you just taking a wild guess, or did you get it tested? Do you know? Well, no. Well, I'm going to call it Category 2, and I want you to pay for all the repairs that had to be done to this house because you tore out stuff unnecessarily. Now, if you don't have that documented, you could be holding the bag for that. If you're not holding the bag for it and you win that fight, it takes all your fight away from winning other negotiating points within the job scope and the job price. So make sure when you're making that determination between Category 2 and Category 3 that you have proper documentation. Pretty simple little trick to do is when you extract some water, just put it in a clear glass container, label it, date it, put it in the refrigerator and save it, or just simply go ahead and send it to a lab and get it tested. There's very, very, very few water samples you will ever send in and get tested that don't come back with elevated levels of bacteria. Floors are dirty. Walls are dirty. People walk all over them all day long. I don't know what percent. It seems like 90% of the homes in America have animals living in the home. And the animals, no matter how good little Fifi is going to pee in the floor every now and then. So you've got all kind of contaminants that are going to be in the floor. And when that water, even though it's from a clean water source, runs across that floor and rinses that house out, that water is going to be contaminated. I don't see any adjuster or consultant having his children drink that extracted water. And you can just look at it when you do an extraction too. Just put it in a clear glass jug and shake it up where it mixes the debris and dirt and bacteria and everything with the water, and just look at it. It looks nasty, but the only way you can prove it's category 3 is have it tested. So if you're going to start tearing a lot of stuff out of a house, be sure that you've got your proper documentation. Documentation also provides integrity for your company. And again, it's important to do it the right way, the same way, each and every time. Do it by a system. Okay, now I'm not saying don't add stuff to it. If you do 3 jobs and they're wanting you to document whatever it is, and you get that request 2 or 3 times, add that to your documentation scope, and that way your documentation increases a little bit, and you can see what they're asking for. But still, stay consistent. Do it the same way every time. It's a lot easier, and you have a lot more confidence when an adjuster comes up and saying, well, that's not the way we've done it. I've been adjusting 35 years, and I've never seen that. And say, well, I'm on claim number 200 this year, and I've done the other 199 exactly this way, and I got paid for them. So with due respect, why are you different than the other 199 we've done this year? Well, we don't do that at Travelers. Sir, if I send you 10 Travelers claims, the whole file with the documentation and proof of where they paid it, would you say you might not be 100% accurate on that? I mean, maybe you do it different, but try to work with them. The goal is not to argue with them, just try to work with them, but don't let them get ridiculous on you, or don't let them ask you to put it in time and material after you put it in Xactimate if your line of billing is Xactimate, or don't let them ask you to take it out of Xactimate and put it in time and material. At that point, they're on a fishing expedition to see which one's cheaper, and you know which one they're going to want to pay on. And if you don't keep up the proper documentation on a job to bill it under time and material because you think you're going to bill it by the square foot, it's hard to go back and create that documentation, because you got to know, you got to document. You got to know what is your crew doing on Monday morning between 8 and 11 o'clock. Were they tearing out sheetrock in the bedroom, or were they hauling debris to the dumpster? What were they doing? Because on the time and material, there's no pricing that includes hauling debris to the dumpster. You've got to do that separately. And they're going to want that at a general labor rate for carrying debris to the dumpster, not at a demolition labor rate. So you've got to know what your crews are doing, what they're working on precisely, and you've got to have that documented to be able to bill on a time and material basis. And billing on a time and material basis, if you're not familiar with it, it's pretty much what it sounds like. You keep up with your time, you keep up with your materials. You'll have some other expenses and stuff that would come into supplies and documents, which can be considered materials, but you just keep up with everything. You have an agreed on labor rate. You have a agreed on price on how you're going to charge for your materials in your original contract, and you have a good scope of work. So make sure you've got all that documentation should you have to back up and do it in time and material. The way I always address that with an adjuster or consultant, when they ask me to change it over, is I tell them we do all of our billing by time and material. We don't do it by Xactimate. Well, I'm not going to pay it unless I get an Xactimate. And I said, I'll be glad to have someone change that over for you. Let me get a price on having that done, and I'll run that price by you, or I'll do a change order with the client to be able to absorb that cost. But I don't know what somebody will charge to do that, but I don't use Xactimate. I commonly refer to Xactimate as Exuctimate because I think it sucks. It's the biggest price fixing scheme that I've ever looked at, in my opinion. But it works really well to get you paid fast on residential and smaller projects that are not difficult. Talked a lot about consultants, and this slide really don't pertain to that, but talked a lot about consultants and or adjusters just to make sure we're all on the same page. An adjuster is either an employee of the insurance company who is an insurance adjuster, and he works for the insurance company. Well, there's a few of those around, but most of the time now they subcontract that out, and that's called third party. So they have a TPA, third party administrator. So they're going to hire J.S. Held, or they're going to hire Meridian Consulting or somebody like that, and they're going to say, we want y'all to do the consulting on this job. The consultant goes in, and he's the hatchet guy, he's the hammer guy, he's the guy that wants to make sure all the paperwork is correct and everything is documented. And if it's not correct and it's not documented, then they don't want to pay for it. And so there'll be the guys that say, well, if you can't prove that the dumpster was 200 yards from the house and you had to have two guys with a wheelbarrow carrying it across the grass to put it in the dumpster, I'm not paying you that extra $300 for labor to get that done. You have to prove that to me. You have to document it, would be the more correct word instead of prove. You have to document that for me. So then the consultant will give his paperwork to the adjuster, and the adjuster will make the final decision, which most of the time runs right with the consultant. Sometimes it don't. Sometimes it can go either way. I've had adjusters say, you can say, well, I've already talked to the consultant about this and we've already worked all this out, and that's what we came up with. Well, the consultant don't write the check, sir, I do, and I'm telling you, I'm not paying $30 a day for an air mover, I'm paying $25, and so then they beat you up a little bit more, so you can have that done. And on the other side of the coin, I've had the time where I've told the consultant, listen, I appreciate what you're asking for. We've done the job. We've done our documentation. We've submitted it to the homeowner, and so I'm not authorized to deal with you because my contract's with the homeowner, so we're going to leave it at that. So it can sort of go either way when you're working with a consultant.